I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is The Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do. Hello, welcome back to The Innkeepers. My name is Cara.
And I'm Steve. And Cara, I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about our guest today.
So today we are very privileged to have with us Dr. Barney Davis, and he is a psychiatrist who has had an amazing career providing missionary care all around the world. And he and his wife, who passed away a while ago, founded an organization called Godspeed Resources in 1998. And so for the last almost 30 years here, he has been providing missionary care and just has so much to share with us about his own journey and how God got him on the path of missionary care and just how God has used him and his wisdom that he has gained in all these years of working with missionaries.
Okay. Remind me again the first time that we met Barney.
So we got to meet Barney at a Care Connection conference here in the Portland area in 2014.
Okay.
And he came to this conference, which is all about missionary care, and was one of the workshop speakers. And it was just a really amazing time to have him at the conference, and then we got to just spend time with him, and he spoke life over our dream. Remember that? You were there, Steve.
Yeah. So 2014, so that means at that point, and usually that conference was in March, I think.
Yeah.
So at that point, the idea of Sanctuary Inn was probably all of about 3 months old.
Yeah,
so
we were just dreaming.
We had just dreamed. We were dreaming, what would it look like? What would what would missionary care look like, and so on. And we had a lot of ideas because we had met with great friends that helped us brainstorm through things, and that would continue. The brainstorming continued for another year or more. But even we just started throwing out some ideas to him, and I remember him being very, very encouraging to us.
Yeah, I felt like he said, run with it. This is so needed. And it was just such an encouragement to have someone of his experience level in the mission field say, you know what, you are in a niche, and you have there's a felt need there, so go for it.
Yeah. Tell me why it's significant that a psychiatrist would step into the field of member care.
Well, a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. They have usually private practices that are very lucrative, and they have a pretty good clientele with just the demand is high for their services because there really aren't enough good qualified psychiatrists around these days. Even today, it's still pretty much not a really big number of people going to study that field. So it's hard to find good psychiatrists, and then to have a psychiatrist that's willing to give of their time and energy to care for missionaries all over the world it's just such a gift.
Yeah. Well, and when you listen today, you'll hear how he stepped from this full-time career into a position where he was supported and continues to be supported by outside resources, and he's not in private practice anymore, and how anyway, it really was a giant step for him to take and step away from, like you said, a very lucrative career. Well, let's jump into the interview. I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from Dr. Barney Davis.
Dr. Barney, we are so glad that you're here with us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for asking. It's good.
You bring such a wealth of knowledge and experience and just your own story. We would love to hear more of your story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came into the field of missionary care and some of your training and what has made you passionate about missionary care?
First of all, let me thank you that the way you phrase that, a wealth of experience, is the nicest way anybody's told me I'm really old in a long time. So I'm grateful for that. I was raised in a Christian home. I'm convinced of that. I do believe I'll see my parents in heaven. But the faith that they practiced was not necessarily integrated into life. And so went to church and all that. But I managed to escape my upbringing without any knowledge of the gospel. I didn't get saved till about 33 years ago. So I'm a latecomer in the whole process. And so I am a psychiatrist, and I had a private practice of general psychiatry with an emphasis on things like neuropsychiatry and psychopharmacology and geriatric psychiatry and all those kind of things, mostly initially in Texas, which is where I trained and how to practice. But then later, because I was trying to pursue my lifelong dream of trying to get where I could sail around the world, we moved to Maryland, which was closer to big water than Texas was. And I went to church because that's what looks good on the resume and is what socially upward mobily physicians do. And anyway, I got saved, and it kind of blew me out of the water, so to speak, literally. Kind of negated the sailing career. I got saved by reading scripture. All of that I think is important because, again, my next step, still having a lot of flesh and still do, but okay, well, I'm a Christian physician now. What am I supposed to do? I think I'll go do short-term medical missions work, which I did. I did several things. And as a physician, I can do some things of general medical quality, and I've had some experience with that. But I quickly found that as a psychiatrist, short-term, like 2 or 3 week visits into another culture and another language, it was really hard to apply my trade. I just wasn't time to do it. It was cross-purposes, language-wise, cross-purposes culturally. In the early 90s, I was offered an opportunity, providentially, of course, but I didn't know it then, to visit some people affiliated with what was then known as the Commission Project in the early 90s. It was a intentional 5-year program in what was then the former Soviet Union. The walls had just come down. They were sending in short-term missionaries with no real long-term career people to go to because there wasn't anybody in the countries.
Right.
They were small teams of short-term people going, scattered throughout the former Soviet Union, and I was offered a chance to go visit some of those teams with a large church group that had some of their members that were in this. And so off I go to Russia with no knowledge whatsoever of missions or missionaries or anything else, and visited a lot of these folks. At every stop, I mean, I was just inundated with, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Okay. And it was about anything from my kids got an earache and I don't know what to do about it to my wife and I are really struggling here, or we miss our whatever, our grandparents, whatever, just the usual life stuff. So I came back after that visit, came back and told my psychiatric nurse, counselor type wife, Karen, I said, I think we may have ministry. And so that's when we started then on our own dime, so to speak. I was still in practice, running a practice. We started going back and visiting members of the commission teams over the next 4 years of that 5-year program. We'd go back several times a year to mostly Russia, but then we'd meet them at their breaks in Switzerland and in their preparation time here before they were launched. What happened was at the end of that 5-year period of time, all these different agencies that had been involved with commission came to us and said, can you do that same thing for us in Honduras? Can you do that same thing for us in Mozambique? Can you do that same thing for us in whatever? And so my wife and I kind of looked at each other and said, how many times do you get a chance to do what you really want to do? So I left income producing practice, as it were, in 1998, and we went full time in the process of the two of us providing ministry. At that time, economically, the thing to do was I was still paying for everything, but I needed kind of a tax shelter. So we started an organization, a 501c3 called Godspeed Missionary Care, which initially was just the two of us. But then we started accreting others and drawing others in. We were in Maryland at that point in time. And some other folks, maybe you know the name David Wickstrom. He's an extraordinarily well-known MK rep, himself an MK, but also just a good member care psychologist, excellent legend. Started the Mental Health and Missions Conferences, by the way. He was the founder of those. And some other folks were down in Columbia, South Carolina. They were building a member care center down there. And they called and said, can you guys come down and join us? We'll take over the organizational part and you can run the medical part, which I thought, praise God.
Yeah.
I'm out of
Yeah.
I'm out of the administrative business.
Right.
I got down there, and it turned out that the actual infrastructures of both of our organizations didn't so easily mesh. It was not a conflict. It was a matter of just organizational structure. So we co-labored as separate. They were called Missionary Resources Connection. We were Godspeed Missionary Care. And at some point in the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, at some point, that's where they merged for Godspeed Resources Connection, which is the GRC that has my logo here, their logo on my shirt. They may be actually renaming. I'm told that they're possibly rebranding, which means I'll lose half my wardrobe. But anyway, we had to take the missionary word out, because by this time we're serving a lot of people that work in countries where you can't use that word. So the website's sterile. It talks about international workers, etc. Anyway, that's what I've been doing functionally since 1998. It's full-time involvement with member care services. Interacting with those. The interruptive part, which is important in terms of my development and my relationship with God and just the overall process, was that Karen, who was way the smarter of the two of us and much more fun to talk to, developed some neurological symptoms at age 49, and which turned out to be, of course, I was in the business, so I was early to pick it up, but she developed an early onset dementia, which progressed over the next 11 years or so. I took sabbatical from work to care for her, and we moved to Phoenix at that time from South Carolina, because we have a daughter here in Phoenix, and I wanted to be near one of the kids, so if anything happened to me, they could take care of her. And so I was pretty much offline for about 6 or 7 years there. She died 5 years ago, graduated 5 years ago. In the meantime, the running of GRC had continued to just upgrade and upgrade and upgrade. It's grown. It's significantly way more involved in many different areas and under great leadership now. I called them after Karen's death at some point. There was a period of time there where, a little personal note, she had a frontal temporal dementia, as it turned out, which meant her personality completely changed. The woman I married was not the woman that passed away at all, and hadn't been for 4 or 5 years. So I'd already said goodbye to my wife quite a number of times and didn't expect to have much other to feel or say when she died. But I missed her. I think God's serious about that oneness thing. Even in who she had become, I still missed her presence. So I was a little bit too slammed by just grieving, I think, to actually work. So I went and took a year certification in biblical counseling to kind of integrate that into my technically secular, although I try to integrate anyway. But I did call GRC and say, can I just go back to work? I don't want to run anything. I just want to go see people. And so that was about 5 years ago. And have been since that time doing mostly on-field work when we could until COVID. About 50% of my year would be on the field at various places visiting people. But COVID has switched us back to almost 100% virtual at this point, as it has most people. So that's the long story, not even shortened.
Thank you for sharing and just helping us get the big picture, the story, the journey that you've been on. That God has, he sounds like he grabbed your attention and plopped you right where he wanted you and gave you ministry in ways you didn't even anticipate.
Yeah, I'm always regularly excited and rewarded by where he takes me. I'm not always happy with the way he got me there. But at the same time, it's he's good, and it's been great. I'm having more fun in my practice in memory care than I ever had before, and so this is good.
Well, I think one of the things that we often are trying to communicate with people that are listening to the podcast are that missionaries are pretty ordinary people. You know, they're not superstars, they're not superheroes. They are amazing people because they really do have a lot of amazing faith, and we want to be quick to acknowledge that. But so when you're traveling, or either via computer or face-to-face, are there things that are typical or consistent that you see with people working cross-culturally? Are there things that tend to pop up like, oh, this is not an uncommon thing?
Well, I mean, by and large, missionaries are more like us than most of us. They come into service for the Lord by his calling, but not pristinely all put together. I mean, if he's got me in the business, then he's not limiting obviously who he chooses. And as could attest Peter and John and a bunch of other people that he picked up on the side, by the sea. No, I think any of you, and you're in the field as well, people entering service now are typically coming in more wounded, adverse childhood experiences, difficult lives, saved out of problematic backgrounds. And so if life experience is one of those things that happens to everybody, it happens to missionaries a lot. And so I don't find that there is a pattern necessarily that, that person's really going to be a good missionary. It's absolutely due to the calling of the Lord. And he uses, I'm going to up front tell you that the single verse that has both dictated or described and assured me in my own lifetime, but more than that which I see on the field is the Genesis 50:20 passage, which most everybody's familiar with. Joseph's brothers have figured out, he knows they're now with him in Egypt. Father's there, except father has just died, and the brothers are basically fearing that, well, since dad's died, he was just waiting. Now he's going to get even with us. And he, in turn, they plead with him for their survival, and his response, depending on your translation, basically says, no. That which was intended, or you intended for evil, God will use for good, that many will be saved. And the fact that God allows all of these difficulties, past and present, in our lives is painful. We try to help with understanding. We try to help people with resilience and getting through and understanding and rewiring where it needs to be so that your reactions are not just automatic, but more importantly, to recognize his sovereignty. And why would a good God who only gives good gifts to his kids allow this in your life? And how is he going to use it for the kingdom? And so it's not like people coming in with problems ought to get rid of their problems before they go in. He's brought them in because of the problems. He's allowed the problems in some way that he's going to use that in their ability to then reach out to somebody else. And a lot of times it's people's pain that equips them best to be heard by the guy that's in pain himself, So, no, I don't know a particular pattern other than we're just, Romans 7 written for me, but others can read it. We all have some flesh going on, and we carry our own stuff with us, but it's all under the sovereignty of God. Maybe that's too much for your answer, but that's my experience. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. God is in the business of redeeming missionaries just as much as the people that missionaries are sent to.
And when the guy in pain, or the couple in pain, or whatever, grief, loss, trauma, whatever it may be, when they can begin to sense that redemption component, where they can see that their own suffering, their own upset, their own hurt is now actually equipping them in some way to then be of service to somebody else. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make the pain go away, but it gives cause and purpose and meaning, and it makes it useful rather than just painful. So, yeah.
Yeah. That can be healing in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, do missionaries ever have big psychological problems?
No, they're all crazy. No. No. Well, they kind of are. But missionaries, come on.
You see she's a schizophrenia and mental health disorder.
Actually, the formal psychiatric big-time diagnoses, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, major depressive disorder, etc., the diagnosable conditions, somewhat self-select out earlier on because of just the nature of the illness. It typically presents earlier in life, and so by the time they go through a screening process, there's usually, if that were there, it's been picked up and sort of said, maybe this is not the best connection. But that's changing, particularly in terms of the affective disorders, things like bipolar disorder and major depressive disorder. As recently as 7 or 8 years ago, a diagnosis of bipolar disorder would automatically cause an exit from the field and or stop anybody going if that was picked up early on. That's not true anymore. We've got people that have clear-cut histories of bipolar disorder that are actively working on the field and are good control, medicationally, psychotherapeutically, functioning normally. And so I don't see much schizophrenia. First onset schizophrenia, I'll see maybe 2 or 3 times a year. First onset psychosis, usually in a younger population like an MK, a situation where a kid is developing an acute psychosis. I had one just 3 or 4 weeks ago in a full adult who had a sudden onset psychotic situation. I thought it was so sudden and so dramatic, we thought probably it had a biological background or basis in something, but we never could find it. But we were able to get her stabilized from afar with limited resources there, and then eventually she was expatriated back to her home of origin and is doing fine. But we don't see much of that. So the majority of diagnoses, and again, caveat emptor, I am a board certified psychiatrist, which means I have board certification as an expert in the only field of medicine that can't prove any diagnosis it makes. Okay. Um,
True.
because now, sooner than later, we will have actual tests that we will be able to run to send you off for your depression titer or the PET scan to look at for your. In fact, I was reading a paper today that EEG brainwave testing is now able at the research level, but reproducibly so, to distinguish both PTSD and depression in terms of subtypes that may or may not respond to medication.
Wow.
Wow,
So
that'd be
which
super
one,
helpful.
which ones of those should you medicate? Which ones is not going to probably do any good? Not instead of, but in addition to. So we're getting closer to having better actual practical definition of when some of the medical interventions work.
Uh-huh.
But by and large, all of our diagnoses are pretty subjectively determined. So as best we can, we try to hold on to that. No, most of it's for illness issues, it's almost always some form of either traumatic response, PTSD, major depression or depressive disorders, panic anxiety, or generalized anxiety issues. So trauma-related, depression-related, anxiety-related, that's most of what we deal with, for sure.
Can you talk a little bit about someone trying to maybe overcoming the stigma of asking for help? That maybe, oh, I shouldn't have a problem. How maybe sometimes they have to get around that first. Like they have to recognize that yes, I do
Oh,
need
yeah.
to talk to someone.
Excuse me. So much of that is dependent upon their past training and experience, the agency they serve with, the milieu, and the culture that they're from. In that some are proactive about saying, "Hey, how you doing?" And others, parenthetically, I have a couple that is now they've had active and wonderful missionary service back in the U.S. They're feeling absolutely incorrectly, I think, called to go back to the field rendering member care. And they've just lost two of their major supporting churches who said, we don't consider caring for missionaries as something we think is worthy of support. So, that kind of thing still happens in terms of the recognition of
Wow.
the worth and the value. Corporate America never would send somebody without that kind of preparation and ongoing care. But to the personal issues of everybody does, well, the diseases of depression and a lot of others come with kind of an inordinate sense of guilt. I'm a bad person. I ought to be doing better anyway. So some of that comes with the illness itself. And a lot of it depends on your theology. If you're more of a classic or Arminian basis, there's more personal involvement and guilt perhaps, and more reformed, there's more fear of maybe I never wasn't chosen in the first place. But I mean, literally the theology will sometimes dictate this. It's getting better in that we're getting younger and younger people that are coming in. And as I've already mentioned, there's a higher degree of already having faced issues. They've already had counseling. They've already had some kind of interface. They're not opposed to it. And so it's less so. I address it up front. I mean, kind of like say, okay, hi, I'm Barney, and let's start off from scratch. Yes, you need to pray more and love the Lord more and read your scripture more. Okay, let's get, because that's true for all of us.
Right.
It is absolutely true for all of us.
Yeah.
I need to read scripture more and pray more and trust God more. That would not necessarily keep me from getting appendicitis, or it might not keep me from getting asthma, or it might not keep me from getting a depression.
Right.
So it's there. It's still palpable. It's always upsetting and concerning when I hear it. But I would, in my now 30 plus years of doing member care, it is way less the problem. People are seeking help now that would have never said so before, which is good. Yeah.
So you've seen the shift in the 30 years.
Oh, absolutely. And some of that's mechanical. I mean, the agencies, the attrition rates are such that people are losing faster than they can supply people. And so with increased levels of quote unquote pathology, people coming in, as I mentioned, with bruised pasts and stuff that may put them in higher risk anyway, with the transiency and just the geopolitical unrest of our world right now, mission agencies are finding it difficult to get people out there and keep them out there. And it's an economic issue. Why invest, a ton of money to try to get somebody prepared to go to have them come back in 18 months because they just burned to a crisp. Yeah. So they're finding it important to take proactive steps. Our organization, GRC, has now just completed its third or fourth contract, so to speak, arrangement with people like MedSend, the funding agency for a ton of medical missionaries, Christian Health Service Corps, Velvet Ashes, South American missions that have said, can you do wellness checks for our people? So you can be in regular, preemptive, proactive contact just to see how things are going. Are they thriving? Are they feeling okay? And we use the term struggling well. It's hard to find anybody that's not having some difficulty, wherever they may be.
That's life.
But that's life. But are they handling it well? Do they have resources, et cetera? And so if somebody is having difficulty, we can try to address that at that time. Or if not, we've then made a connection with them enough so that if then something happens 2 months or 6 months or 9 months down the road, and they at least know somebody to call that's already got some information. So those kind of preparatory, preemptive maneuvers are way more common now. Way more common, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds
preventive medicine beats
Yeah.
third-ring treatment every time. So
yeah, absolutely. So, what would you say are some signs that someone should be reaching out for help to a counselor, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist?
Well, I mean, most of your listeners may not be sailors, but again, that was my whole goal in life. And there was, if you have sails up and you look like there's a storm coming, if the storm hits, you want to reduce your sail area. That's called reefing the sails, okay?
Okay.
And the old adage was the time to reef is when you first think about it. So if you see the storm coming, and you say, gee, I wonder if I need to reef. Yes, is the answer. Because if you wait until the storm hits and the wind is blowing and the boat's laying on its side, it's 10 times harder to get to the sails and make all that kind of stuff happen. It's just very, very difficult. So sooner than later is always the best answer. If you feel like there's a question, check with somebody and let's see what's going on. That's first of all. My basic criteria are that if the usual issues of taking it to the Lord, I mean, you follow Matthew 18 for interpersonal conflicts, you basically take a look at your ability. Are you doing already the things that God has instructed us to do? Mm-hmm. Are you handling conflict biblically? Have there been efforts made to seek the usual resources that we have between friends and family and others? And you're having mine, or what we call in my business called the vegetative symptoms. Consistent trouble sleeping, chronic feelings of tiredness or restlessness. I just can't get out of bed. I just have no energy anymore. Or I can't sleep. I'm jumping around all the time. I'm so anxious. Changes in appetite or weight of any significance. Physical symptoms that don't have a good explanation or can't be dealt with. If there's prolonged periods of time when you've not had a break, and that's all obviously varies from field to field, situation to situation, but or times of recent transition, having just gotten on the field and or getting ready to leave for any particular, whether it's an elective HMA or maybe it's just a debrief or whatever, but times of transition. All those are the times you want to kind of turn the light on and say, hey, am I doing okay here? Maybe I have a fellow that was a missionary in Russia way back when I was talking about 30 years plus ago, who still contacts me on a regular basis, probably once or twice a year. He's not even in the mission work anymore. He's still connected to the kingdom and doing great work, but he's stateside based, but he calls it his checkup from the neck up. He will check with me every so often and say, am I doing okay? Let me just go over what's cooking. It's like going to his dentist, he says, twice a year. So again, the proactive kind of regular assessment, I think, is valuable. But if someone's saying, gee, maybe you think I ought to talk to a counselor? The answer is probably yes. It's worthy of finding out at that point in time. Talk to somebody and see what happens with the process. Yeah.
So, and if someone does realize, wow, I need to, I've checked and I've tried all these things that you mentioned, and I do need to get help. What steps would you suggest?
Well, it depends on what the situation is and who they're with. There are some agencies that already have really effective, solid member care function and action within their own organization. Some people that I'll get referrals from are other member care people with other organizations that are doing world-class job of keeping track of people. And they're asking me for maybe kind of that psychiatric extra piece of, is there evidence here of something more significant or medicine is needed? So if in fact your particular agency already provides some people, then use them, Now, there have been problems, of course, that some agencies and some very well-known agencies have either been inadvertently or advertently that decided to connect their member care issues, with HR or something, and people were afraid to say, I can't go to my own organization, or at least the thing I want to talk about is that my jerk organization, I'm having trouble with my team leader. I can't,
Yeah.
well, talk to your team leader. No, he's my problem. Okay. So what do you do about that? So they're looking for outsourced resources. So if there are other non-appropriate or not accessible issues, our organization is open for that question. Now, we are called Godspeed Resources. I'm on support. We don't get any of the money that comes out of this. I mean, there's a fee attached. It's extraordinarily minimal compared to private care kind of stuff. But GRC, and I'll put in the plug now, at this point, it's headquartered in South Carolina, but we have clinicians spread from Brazil to Phoenix, for that matter, to other parts of the world. Right now, we've got 4 psychiatrists. We're the only organization that has psychiatrists. We got 4. Everybody involved with us is missions connected in some way. 4 psychiatrists, and I think at the moment 7 licensed counselors, all with missions experience, varying from PhD psychologists to licensed mental health counselors to LPCs. And the website, which you can, I'm sure at some time, put up on the screen. Yeah, GodspeedResources.org. If you go to that, it'll clearly have a get started or ask for help kind of request for service, which is a sterile but appropriate form you fill out, goes to them. They'll be back in contact saying, how can we help? And so we've got intake procedures that kind of help triage the circumstances about how quick does this need to be done, what are the ages involved. So our organization, we're not the only one, and there's plenty of good ones out there. Well, maybe not plenty. There's good ones out there, but there's not enough resources. But certainly GRC is willing to provide that. And there's times when we will listen to a problem and say, you know what, we're not the right people to do this, but let me tell you who you can call. And so we will refer in that regard. Yeah.
So really, it's take a step if you feel like.
Yeah, take a step. Hold up your hand.
Yeah.
Back of the room. Say, hey, I've got a question here.
When you talk to missionaries about kind of their daily lives, which vary from place to place depending on where they are in the world, but I think we all can have healthy routines no matter where we're living. What kinds of things do you think are important that make up a good, healthy routine?
Well, again, I can give you, and you probably already know the list, and those of us in the care business at some level kind of have that. We already know what we wish everybody could do. Sometimes the settings don't permit it. Sometimes they don't always have permission to do some things. I mean, there are a couple of things. Obviously, let's go back to we need to pray more and trust God more and read our Bible more. One of the first things that goes when people begin to get under stress is their personal walk. They start cutting back on their time with the Lord, time in the Word. And so I always ask about that, not in a judgmental way, but because people will say the conflict, the process, the hurt, the whatever's happening, that's given up. So a return to the thing that makes us tick, the core of our being, is always in order. And that is if that can be done, and particularly kind of a kickstart with a retreat of some kind, or a couple of days away, or go to the beach, or go walk in the woods, or do something to kind of get back on track with God. That's if at all possible, that's the core issue. Maintaining just a personal walk. Taking a break of any kind is at least temporarily therapeutic. We've got one agency that we have recommended, and another one that on their own did it. There's one agency we work with. It mostly sends medical people, and they're in their contract with their missionaries. They mandate that they must take 6 days off every quarter away from the work. All right. Wow. And which is massively helpful. And if you think we're kidding, we're not going to pay you. If you won't get a paycheck, you won't get your support check if you don't do that. Show us that you've done it. And we're not talking about, just sleeping in. We're talking about getting away from the issues at hand, going somewhere or in some circumstance that represents a change that allows your system to kind of reboot and restore. So regular scheduled time apart from however that might look. And it varies from situation to situation. It's really more the intent and the regularity of it than it is the actual process of where and when. The other things that, we forget about, and again, they're not always possible to be done, but the one people always ask me for years, even before I got saved, still practicing medicine. Is there anything I can do to make my anxiety better, my depression better? And the answer is across the board, this has been true multiple times, shown by scientific study. The one thing we can do that actually makes a difference physiologically is regular aerobic exercise. So working out, if you're used to that sort of thing, taking at least a brisk walk 2 or 3 times a week, even doing in-house little aerobics of some kind, that is physiologically therapeutic and restorative. Even if you feel awful in the process, it's still doing something good. So regular aerobic exercise has a distinctly positive impact on emotional functioning. And that's because as you both know, we're learning more and more about the systems that God has put in place in our brains to process emotions. And there's so much that's interconnected with physical function,
We're whole
that,
people.
yeah, exactly. We're whole people. And so just paying attention to those things, if even just some basic relaxation exercises, in the middle of a really awful day, teaching yourself to be able to take 10 slow breaths and hold them, and just that simple breathing exercise of just taking the few minutes to take 10 slow breaths, just breathing deeper at that moment with the process of relaxation, it really has more impact than one would imagine, but it's provable and true. And again, we weren't created to be in a vacuum. We serve a God of restored relationships who's all about this. So talking with somebody, even you don't have to seek a counselor, to just be able to ventilate, particularly if it's issues like grief or just trauma, just being able to talk about what one felt. The listener doesn't have to do anything but be there, to receive without judgment or without critique. And so our tendency is to avoid and clam up when exactly it's the opposite that really is therapeutic. So these are things we could all do pretty much wherever we are. It varies on what it looks like depending on the restrictions of geography, culture, danger, whatever.
Yeah. There may be limitations, but I'm sure all of us could take some more deep breaths, and all of us could,
yeah.
yeah.
I'm gonna take 10. I'm gonna take 10 when I'm done with this because I got some things.
Okay.
We don't stress yet, right?
No, we're good. It's the other things. You guys are a joy. This part's fun.
Yeah. Do you have a story or a scenario that you could share, at least some details of maybe someone that contacted Godspeed and you were able to work with them and share a little bit about a positive transformation?
Well, I got 200 or 300. Where do you want me to
Well,
start?
let's start with just 100 of them.
Just start with 100 of them.
Yeah.
I don't mean to be avoidant of this. Literally, there's so many, it's hard to pick the one that was the most obvious. But for me personally, and again, my bias is probably going to be in terms of my assessment of how to answer that question is going to involve some degree of medical component. Because often I'm in the process of me taking the history of being referred to me. Thank God I'm in an age where I no longer feel like I have to have all the answers. I think my task is more to make sure that the right questions are being asked, because so many times when I'm asked to assess somebody, we're not really doing anything other people can do except taking more time to ask more questions, just to let somebody give the full history. So, for instance, very recently, permission to talk about this in the generic, I'll try not to identify anybody, but somebody I've actually worked with, a prominent, very successful in terms of output and work and kingdom impact for literally years, and medically connected. There's some medical issues in terms of they're within the healthcare spectrum, but with a ton of personal, both remote and present stresses and issues that had never really been worked through. And then the newest ones have required some really meticulous kind of disentanglement. And I've had the privilege of working with this person and the family and various members of the family, off and on, for like 3 years. And so deal with this problem and kind of work on some things and kind of then drop off, and something else pops up and we deal with it and something else pops up. And so I've gotten to know them quite well. But in the last, make up a number, 3 years, 2 years, well, I've been seeing them for maybe 3 or 4, the last 2 years, there's been the increasing component of what looks like is burnout, and with a good explanation, because so much stuff going on in their lives, in their work, and just in the world, that just exhaustion and a sense of futility. There's not enough of me to go around, and there isn't, but even more of that than usual. And just a sense of, and which then it begins to get people irritable, and you start then developing conflict out of irritability. You start getting team frictions and all the stuff that you recognize happens out of when we're not functioning at our best. And so, okay, let's plan to have an intense time of 2 or 3 days at least of debrief or somewhere to go into this more deeply, just kind of start from scratch and look at the situation. All right, couldn't do it. Scheduled a time to do it earlier in the year, got slammed by COVID. It's going to meet internationally for a break time in a certain situation. Everything got canceled. Waited until later, not terribly long ago, they actually were able to finally get back to the U.S. And the only time and place that we could find a chance to meet was for like 5 days at a lakeside cabin. somewhere in a different part of the U.S. It was remote, okay, and you can argue all day the ethics of the psychiatrist coming in and actually living with the evaluating patient. But hey, missionary service, you go. I mean, I've had the issue of sleeping, of talking with somebody during the daytime somewhere on the field with the most intimate of issues, and then helping them wash dishes that night because I'm staying in their house because there was no other place to stay. So I mean, those inadvertent and inescapable issues of careful boundary settings. Anyway, so I was with them for 3 or 4 days in a remote cabin with few amenities, but pleasant and beautiful. Had plenty of time, a lot of time to really focus back on some of the things that we knew about and some of the extensions of that we hadn't paid attention to. And that was good, made some good progress. The most viable and probably the most helpful is that I couldn't sleep when I was there. And the reason I couldn't sleep when I was there because the person snored all night long, very profoundly, which since I was awake, I was then able to count the number of apneic episodes I was hearing, 30 or 40 times during the night where he wasn't breathing.
Wow.
And so out of that experience, we got him evaluated. He got one of the worst cases of obstructive sleep apnea that people have seen in that major center. So he is being fitted for his appurtenances and all the appliances and stuff. So the impact medically of obstructive sleep apnea can be exhaustion, tiredness, chronic tiredness, irritability, depression, difficulty with cognition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the things that have been part of the complaints can be at least, if not explained by, certainly impacted by this.
Exacerbated.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's that kind of situation where I would have never known that on a Zoom call, by the way.
Sure.
You know, I would have never been able to pick that up on a regular office visit. So that's one of those things where God orchestrates circumstances where we get more information and more information. You go, wow, okay, finally beginning to get all the pieces of the puzzle. That particular situation was important, no less so than some personal relationships of 35 years ago that need to be understood, no less important than some current stresses. But all of that needed to be understood in the context of, well, as a good God who only does good things, what kind of package is he putting together in this guy's life? So, you know, when you get to be part of something like that, when you get to be allowed in to the most kind of intimate evidences of what God is doing in a person or allowing in a person, conflict or success, either way, that's just exciting to then begin to see the pieces that are falling into place, what God really wanted you to see and how he's using that. So that's, I hope that was, I think if this guy is listening at some point in time, he'd say, I can't believe you said that. Well, I didn't qualify who it was and where it was or what it was. But that's the kind of thing that I see those things happening all the time, which is why at age 76, I'm still doing what I'm doing and hope to get another 10 years at it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's kind of just a fascinating example of emotional, spiritual, physical, all
the above.
Yeah.
And every piece of that, theological issues, past personal issues, psychological issues, conflict issues, mechanical issues, physical issues, every bit of that we have now had time enough and opportunity enough to really at least ask right questions again and start looking for right answers. And it's just, for lack of a better term, it's fun. I'm not the one that necessarily has to deal with all of it, but it's good stuff to see God work. It really is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So what would you say that you wish more missionary caregivers or family members or people who are providing support for missionaries knew or understood about caring for missionaries?
I think starting with the very thing you started off with, they're like everybody else. The fact that they may be serving Jesus in a country 8,000 miles away does not mean that they don't have personal issues, conflict issues, personal needs, failures, days of great joy, days of great sadness, disappointments, longings, joys, etc. That they have, if a person on this side of the ocean, so to speak, is, oh, by the way, while I'm praying for my missionary, I got to pay attention to the fact my kid's sick. And, you know, I haven't been out with my husband we hadn't had date night for 3 weeks, for crying out loud. You know, and I don't know what we're going to do about our finances this week. I'm not totally sure we got enough to buy food. If you're having those problems, I will guarantee you that the person that you're praying for and supporting on the other side of the ocean is having exactly the same problems. Maybe not exactly at the same time, but the same nature of interpersonal relationship, day-to-day living challenges, questions about just the stuff of life, they're dealing with it too. And so to be able to pray specifically for that is helped if you contact them and say, need to know how you're doing. How can I best pray for you? You know, in the old days, Karen and I would have people come to our church to give a presentation, and they would give the standard and valuable presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so many people heard the gospel. We're building a new church. Praise God, it's all going well. And they'd come to our house to stay with us and weep on the couch because they were exhausted or tired, and they were afraid to mention that, afraid somebody would lose support or lose prayer support or financial support. So to have a non-judgmental interest in the well-being of another person is they will know us by our love for each other. That's biblical. And to live that out, even in terms of how we address and deal with our missionaries, wherever they may be. And sometimes that doesn't require, well, most of the time it doesn't require you to do anything. The listening is just, the number of times that we've gone places for what looked like an ostensibly very good reason. There was a purpose in going, and perhaps there's a purpose that we could see when we got there. But you'd check back later with, you know, how did we do? Did it work well? What would you do differently? Across the board, they say, I can't believe you just came. You listened. You just sat there. You let me weep over the loss of my sister, that I wasn't able to go to her funeral because I was 8,000 miles away. And you let me grieve. You know, that just being with somebody in the midst of their pain itself is therapeutic. That's the body of Christ at work. Okay. And so to the extent that we can do that for each other, wherever we may be and whatever level of support or involvement we are, that's good stuff, you know. And some of the best work I've ever been privileged to do, so to speak, was just shutting up and sitting still and listening to somebody. And a lot of us can do that. I don't do as well as I ought to, but yeah, does that help in that regard?
It also is encouraging to me in terms of so much of what you said is part of what our vision and our ministry is here at Sanctuary Inn, is to provide that space.
Exactly, the opportunity and place and space to safely be able to experience your heart.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. We people are always asking, well, what's the schedule when I'm there? And the schedule, I always write back, well, the schedule is like, there's not a schedule.
Right.
We want you to come. We want you to enjoy being outside. We live in a near a national forest. Go explore, get outdoors, breathe some fresh air, sleep in, and then go back to sleep. Keep sleeping, and eat whatever you want, and we'll check in with you and see how you're doing. So
and eventually we do provide a cross-cultural debriefing as well. But our focus is to provide that time and space that you're talking about that's so desperately needed.
Y'all open next week? No, wait a minute. I've got some stuff scheduled, but
we would love to have you. We would.
I'd love to. Well, I'm on your side of the country. Maybe I'll get up there.
Right.
I'd love to.
Please do.
We look forward to it.
As long as I don't have to stay up all night listening to somebody snore and count their apneic episodes, if that would be good.
We'll put you in your own room.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. That would be great. No, but you're exactly right. The atmosphere of being just quietly in God's hands and not without expectation, without some, what do I have to do with this or respond to this? Just being there and taking that deep breath emotionally, physically. And for me personally, if there's an outdoors to get to, for me, I'm kind of a water guy myself. I've been on a boat, works for me, but also we had a men's retreat this last weekend at my church, and we were up at the Tonto Rim, which in Arizona is somewhat like what you've got, mountains, trees, pine trees, you know, a lovely area. And there's just something that is just so refreshing about just being in the silence of God's creation like that. And it's humbling and restorative. So yeah, good on you for what you're doing.
Okay. Thank you.
So is there anything that you would like to wrap up and make sure that our listeners know about or just are aware of?
Well, God's still in control. I mean, that's always a good thing to remember, that He's still on the throne. He has a purpose and a part in all of this. Just preaching gospel to yourself on a daily basis, recognizing without judgment just our frailties, and therefore, you know, it is in our weaknesses that He has made strength, that He has strength, and so that we continue our connection with Him. Even in times when it feels like He's disconnected. He isn't, of course, but even when we feel alone. He's right there with us. So to maintain the word, maintain the faith, and just be able to talk about it with people, that's restorative. That's God at work. That's the building of the body. And yeah, it works. Yeah, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. It kind of worked as the basis for Jesus when he answered the question. So I'll go with his answer. Okay.
Sounds great. Good.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
It's been good. Good. Again, good. And thank you so much for what you guys do. It's critical and important and restorative. And I hope to be able to attest to that personally at some point in the future.
And we look forward to it. And just so you know that we do have kind of a signature chocolate chip cookie that we can make available
it's
to
here
you.
waiting for you.
Yeah. Was it not enough that you had already drawn me in and then you used the chocolate word? I mean,
yeah. So.
Get the in front of me chocolate. I mean, that's not even temptation. That's destiny. I'm good with that. So.
Well, that was a lot of information. Dr. Barney is passionate about what he does, and he obviously has a big, big heart for missionaries around the world.
Yeah, and he has, just like I said at the beginning, a wealth of information and experience in this field, and it was just an honor to sit and listen to him. And I never heard his story either, of how God just grabbed his attention and said, I want you doing this. It wasn't even like he had a whole lot of say in it in some ways.
Well, and it was interesting that Barney came to Christ later in life. It was in his early 30s before he even came to Christ. And then it wasn't very long after that, really, it would seem, before the whole idea of this member care started to become kind of on his radar.
Yeah, and I mean, God just kept giving him more and more opportunities to use his expertise as a psychiatrist. And I mean, 30 years ago, there were really so few psychiatrists in the field of missionary care. I mean, he's one of the pioneers.
Yeah, he may have been the only psychiatrist at that point that was in member care. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that he was the only one, but there you could probably count him on one hand.
Yeah. His stories of traveling into Russia, too, in the early 90s. I can imagine, mentally picture some stuff that was happening there, because we were in Eastern Europe in the early 90s, and we weren't in Russia, but there was...
They had the same flavor.
Same flavor, and there were some tough situations, and it was emotionally hard at times to be in Eastern Europe because of the overall discouragement. There was just a discouragement and just a despairing attitude among a lot of people.
Yeah, so he was going in helping international workers when there was no one paying attention to what those people were, those missionaries were doing.
People living in a lot of isolation, seclusion, cut off, and really the very early days of the internet, really. And so people probably just didn't have a lot of resources to be in touch with one another.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think one thing I heard him say that really struck me was how more and more people who are growing up, in their lives, are just more wounds, more trauma, more things happening in their lives. And now these people are stepping into ministry, cross-cultural ministry sometimes, or ministry in the States. And so it's just the fact is that they're just bringing that with them.
Yeah. They don't become super healed, superhero Christians that go to the mission field. They bring their woundedness with them, and that has to be addressed and cared for. And what I loved is, as he even as he brought that up, he was talking about how God doesn't waste anything, and how God can redeem even the missionary in their woundedness, just as the missionary is going to teach others about redemption. He's often redeeming, their own stories first. I'm often telling our missionary guests here, it's kind of been one of my little mantras, has been that God is just as concerned about the life of the missionary and what they do, who they are, and that's just as important as what they do.
Oh, I've seen that over and over again, and because missionaries tend to live with an urgency. Like, we need to raise support. We need to get on the field. We need to be doing this and that, whatever it is. Yeah. And, we're called to do this, and so we have to go and do it, and we can't stop, and all these sort of things. But, so many times God takes people the long way around, and you're like, God, what are you doing? Yeah. I mean, obviously God knows there's a need. Obviously God knows people are perishing without the gospel. But at the same time, God is doing his work in the life of the missionary before he really sends that missionary out to represent him.
Yeah. And I feel like Dr. Barney was talking about that redemption story and multiple times in his conversation with us, and how, even someone with a mental illness, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not fit to be missionaries.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It means get help.
Yeah.
Because you're a human being just like the rest of us that from time to time has struggles.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we're seeing as a theme in our podcast, is that missionaries are normal, real people who just have sometimes some extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah. I appreciate when he mentioned a couple different times that we all know that our time alone with God, praying more, and all these things are so significant and so important. But it's not always the answer. Praying more, reading the Bible more, and so on doesn't fix everything. And I think we want to be really careful to acknowledge the fact that those are significant parts. And Barney came back to it, and he said, don't ever neglect your time with God. But at the same time, it's not the answer for everything. We all know that we fall short of really our own expectations for ourselves. But maybe there's just times you need to step back and step away, or spend some concentrated time with God, or start asking questions. Am I okay? Do I need to talk to someone? And what was the sailing thing he talked about there?
Yeah, well, his analogy was that if you see the storm, then you stop and you think maybe you need to put your sails down, you do it right away. You don't wait till the storm's already hit.
Yeah.
Because then it's too late. And I think that is just a really good analogy for, burnout, being stressed out, being anxious, depressed, any of the many emotional responses we have, which, we're whole people.
Yeah.
We are going to have emotional, spiritual struggles. Like, that's part of life. And I feel like our world has been more stressed out than ever before. But we can still reach out and ask for help.
Yeah, and more resources are becoming available to missionaries. And as he said, too, a lot of organizations have really good member care options within their organization. Sometimes it's necessary to reach outside that organization, but if there is an avenue for you to seek care in your organization, then do that.
Yeah.
Start asking questions.
Yeah, and if not, like you mentioned, Godspeed Resources, they have a website where you can go in and find a counselor, a psychiatrist, or a psychologist that could help you online, wherever you are in the world. So that is a really amazing resource. So we will be putting their website in our notes, and I want you guys to know about one more amazing resource out there.
Yeah. Well, we hope you guys enjoyed this interview with Dr. Barney as much as we enjoyed our time with Dr. Barney. So, again, this is Steve.
And I'm Cara.
And thanks for listening to the Innkeepers. Thank you for tuning in to the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers for kingdom purposes. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, and maybe you were prompted to pass this along to someone you know that will benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy schedules to help us learn more about missionary care.
We also want to thank Tim Downing for the music that he wrote and performed specifically for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can learn more about him and his work at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos and is produced by Tim Cowley of Cowley Visuals. If you have media needs, including film, photography, or audio, you can reach Tim at cowleyvisuals.com.
Our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Gibbons, Kara's amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website and learn more about the ministry of Sanctuary Inn at sanctuaryinn.org. Thank you again for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.
See you next time.